It's exhausting. It really is. And it gets harder and harder to make these, even though I really want to make them. Like, this is something that helps me when I do get it out, whether anybody listens or not. But it is so frustrating, right? Like, I posted that vlog however long ago about information and sources of information and the importance of our sources of information as we're trying to build this shared reality where we can all kind of come together and figure things out together. But when we can't agree on what are the trustworthy information sources, it makes it even more difficult. And to me, I'm just like, I assumed everybody had the same library class that I had to do in the 4th grade. And then again, right, it was only a day, right? They teach you about the Dewey Decimal System, right, because I'm old, back in the day. And then they teach you about, hey, and these are the magazines that you look at, and here's how you find things for your research, right, on a 4th grade level. Then they do it again in junior high for a day, and then they do it again in high school. And because it was only one day, I imagine there are plenty of people who don't remember that. I remember at my college it being a requirement, right? Library science was a literacy requirement in my undergraduate. And so then I had to do, golly, I don't remember how many days it was. It wasn't a full semester, I don't think, but maybe that's because I took it in the summertime. But I think it's like a quarter credit or something that you have to have of a library science class. And in all of these classes, especially the one that I took in college, they talk about the importance of information sources and which information sources are reliable and which information sources aren't reliable. And the internet made that harder, right? I went to college right about the time the internet was getting popular. And I actually even, oh golly, worked while I was going to my junior college for a little bit at a local internet service provider, right? We don't really have those anymore. But back in the late 90s, right, early 2000s, there were local internet service providers, right? It wasn't just Comcast or whatever. I worked at an internet service provider called PE.net, which stood for Press Enterprise.net. Because the local paper had decided to get into the internet service provider business. And so that was an interesting place to be. But in all of this, I learned, right? I learned about, okay, what websites could be a problem and what's the information I'm really getting from websites. I learned about Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not a horrible source for information, but you have to check the sources in the Wikipedia, right? Because anybody can write in a wiki, right? You just add your information. Well, great, but now I need something to back up that information. So when I see the information, I'm going, oh, I need something that shows me where this information came from. Well, great, there's a footnote. I will go look. And then I can go, was this a good source? No. Okay, that's fine. And so in college, you learn, right, when you're writing reports, no good college professor is going to let you put Wikipedia as a source, right? No good college professor. You can have so many media sources, right? But your media sources have to have sources. And so you could use maybe a paper here or there, but they better tell you where they got the information, because really what we're looking for is primary sources of information. Right. And so as I'm in college, I learned, hey, the journals where they publish the actual research that people do. I hate it when people are like, well, do your own research. I'm like, nobody does their own research unless they have a PhD and they are actually going into journals of information and research that people have done before and creating their own hypothesis and have the funds to run the experiment, to do their own research, right? Or the information to bring it together, right? And the access to things that they may need that we all don't necessarily have access to. And so, and then we can go, oh, hey, I need access to this to verify this source. That's fine. You can ask for that at that point. But sometimes we just don't know, right? We don't know what we don't know, and we don't know where to look. So it's frustrating going around and seeing these things. It's been so frustrating with the whole Doge thing, right? Because I'm like trying to understand people, and people are, look, he is posting his evidence. He is posting what he's doing. And I have read government reports, right? I have read those long government reports that are like hundreds of pages long. After they go through, they show the audits, right? I hate doing that, by the way. I don't do it a whole lot. And I don't do it a whole lot because I've read enough of them, right, for different classes or for different things that I'm like, I don't need to keep doing this. I will just see the summary, right? But lately I've had to go, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to read this report because somebody is telling me something that's in it, right? Or they've got conflicting information. That's fine. Or, hey, there's this research that's being done. Okay, great. I will check it. Now, here's the thing about research. Yeah, some people will come up with different things, right? So that's when like I said before, we talk about it. It has to be duplicatable. Well, now we're talking about Doge, right? So when people are showing me, oh, look, they're posting these things on the White House website. Great, because in the past, the White House website has been a decent source of information. And I go onto the White House website and I see their findings and I click on the links that are supposed to take me to those sources. And they take me to tabloid media where they have just told the media these things and the media has just regurgitated that back out. It's not a primary source. It's not proof of anything they've found. And it's ridiculous. Then we have these ledgers, right? And I'm like, great, but you're not telling me where these ledgers came from. You're not telling me the process, right? If you've ever had to read like a report, an experimentation, they tell you the process that they went through to obtain the answers that they got. There is none of that. There's none of that on these websites. There's none of that on these little pictures, right? Which, by the way, people are finding all kinds of inaccuracies in anyway. And so I guess I just don't know what to do. Like, I am trying to be caring, and I know I come off as sassy in writing, and I'm really not that okay, no lies. I'm sassy. I get sassy, but I try to be compassionate as well because I know that to the people around me, these things are real. And I don't want to act like I know so much that I don't have to look at what they're trying to show me. I do look at things to go, okay, if nothing else, going into this person's source, going into this person's information will help me to understand where they are coming from. Now, there are certain people, I will admit, I get tired of looking at their sources because their sources are not sources. Their sources are tabloids regurgitating, right? Just whatever is coming out of Donald Trump's mouth. And I can't. That just frustrates me. And it tells me that they're not caring enough about what I am trying to express, to look into what I am trying to say either. And so, and I can tell you there's a lot of us that are frustrated about that, right? Now, again, if you really like Donald Trump, that is fine. That is fine. You have made a choice that he is saying the truth, right? He is telling you the truth. What is coming out of his mouth is honest. Or if you don't believe what's coming out of his mouth is honest, you believe that somehow it doesn't matter because what he's doing is more important. But I still don't necessarily have evidence that what he's doing is more important. I get a lot of excuses for his behavior, for Elon Musk's behavior. I had a lot of people telling me that I should be more understanding of people's imperfections. And I can tell you, I do not expect a perfect president. I don't expect people to be perfect. I expect a level of professionalism, though, in the office of the president. I have to work with professionalism every day. I have to be professional at my employment. If I behaved as Donald Trump behaved at my place of employment, I would be fired very, very fast, right? If I went to my employer with the evidence that Elon Musk and Donald Trump are trying to present to the American people, they would look at me and laugh. If I said, I need more workers for this reason, they're like, well, show me the evidence, right? Show me what the work is like. Great. I don't mind. I don't mind showing you where things are overwhelmed, right? And I thankfully I don't have to do that because I'm not the boss. I have bosses who do that kind of thing, and they're amazing. But that's what but Donald Trump is the boss. See, that's the difference. Donald Trump is the boss, right? He's the boss, and he is not caring about separation of powers. And by the way, I am furious with my senators. I've already talked about how furious I am with the Republican Party. I was so furious with the Republican Party that I left it, right? In 2016, I thought we could get over this. I thought we could get past it. I thought, golly, people are going to realize and it's going to be okay. And in November of 2024, thinking back to all the people who called me a rhino, I'm like, you have convinced me. You have convinced me that for the last few years, I have been a Republican in name only, because this is not the party that I joined at 18 years old. It isn't. It's there. No. This party is completely changed, because the same senators that are going along with all of these incompetent people that Donald Trump, incompetent people that he is not, they have no credentials for what they are doing. And those are important. Okay, you can get frustrated with educated people. You can be frustrated that you don't always understand what they say. And I'm not saying you have to trust educated people 100%, right? And I'm not saying that people's personal experience does not matter. It totally matters. But people have to understand that sometimes things look different, right? When it's anecdotal, when it's something that just happens to you. Now, you may find people that it happens to as well, but at some point, you've got to go look at the numbers. You've got to go see where it's happening and what the problems are, and if the problem's just with you. I've had to do that in the past. Is it just me? Right? And if it is just me, it's probably not that big a problem. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Our senators and our representatives, the Republican ones, right? And I'm not saying all Republicans are bad. There are most of the people that I have voted for in the last 20 years had an R next to their name, right? And I believe in them. They're good people. They're good people who want to do good things. I believe that. But at this point, now we're dealing with something different. We're dealing with people who are collecting and consolidating power, right? Which, again, is something that has always happened. People collect and consolidate power. But they are giving it to a man who is dismantling our country, who, in my opinion, based on his behavior, is the puppet of a dictator, and who is taking everything right out of his playbook. I remember when he came down that escalator and gave his first speech before he even ran for president, when he was announcing he was running for president. And I, seriously posted right after that. I'm like, ooh, because I have studied dictators. I was like, does that not smack of Pinochet? The way I'm like, that sounds very much like a dictator to me. And I have people, no, I'm like, I don't know. And I thought, after the first election, I was like, you know what, this won't be so bad, right? Congress will keep him in check. He cannot do that much damage. And I hate that I was so wrong about that. I was so wrong about that. And I realized that, right? I didn't vote for him. Golly, no. But I was like, it's okay. We have checks and balances. This won't be so bad. And we barely had checks and the only Republican, I guess there were a few, but the only one that was loud enough for me was Mitt Romney. And I was just thankful he was my senator, right? And I voted for him, right? And I don't always agree with what Mitt Romney does. And I think Mitt Romney has problems, right? And this is where people are like, well, you know, you won't vote for anybody imperfect. You think everybody needs to be perfect. No, I don't think Mitt Romney was perfect. But I think he was a man of integrity, that he tried hard, right? My complaints with Mitt Romney would be, you act like somebody who's never experienced poverty, right? You think like somebody who has never experienced poverty. And I didn't even hold that against him because I knew that he tried. He tried to understand and he tried to care about people. He just wasn't so great at understanding the ins and outs of poverty. So I could vote for him and feel okay because I knew that he was a man of integrity. I knew he'd do good things. For a long time, I'm trying to remember if I ever voted for Mike Lee. I don't think I ever did. But Mike Lee is my other senator. And for a long time, I was like, well, I didn't vote for Mike Lee, but I believe when he talks about the Constitution and his commitment to the Constitution, that he's being sincere, and I can admire that. I can admire that his interpretation of the Constitution is something that's very important to him. And I would listen to him, and I would listen to all. By the way, if you're in Utah, I don't know if you remember back in the day, right around the time Mike Lee was elected for the first time, there were all of these little meetings. Like if you were active in the Republican Party, if you're active in politics like I was, around, like, they're like, everybody needs to learn the Constitution, right? They called them 9/12 meetings, right? Instead of 9/11, 9/12. And so you go to these meetings and they would teach you about the Constitution. The problem is they would teach you about the Constitution the way they interpreted the Constitution, which, is fine. At the very least, you're looking at the Constitution and you're learning the Constitution. I knew enough about the Constitution and I'd read the Constitution enough that I knew the bias that I saw. My husband went and he came home to one of the meetings and he came home and he was like, yeah, I probably won't be going to that again, right? Because it was people who really just wanted to be right. They took the Constitution and they're like, how do I use this document to make sure that I'm right and that what I want gets done, right? Which to some extent I suppose we all can do, but it was more for them about consolidating power. And I know this is going to be way too long. Nobody's going to want to watch it, but whatever. I need to get all this out. And maybe I'll cut it down for this. But let's talk about power for a second. There are so many people. I want people to have power over their own lives. It's one of the reasons that I became a therapist, right? I want people to understand the power that they have in their own lives, right? I worked with people in poverty for most of my adult life. I specifically worked with people in intergenerational poverty, and I worked on Utah's interventions. I was on the pilot program for Utah's interventions, right, for poverty, right? Looking at the research, looking at the things that needed to be done. And I was on the team that was able to do that. And it was a great experience for me. And I learned a lot. And I've learned a lot over the years working with people in poverty, right? One of the worst things about that is this feeling that you don't have power or control over your own life. Now, some of that's perception, right? Some of that's perception, but some of that's true, right? Because you are swimming in these waters where people assume that you know things that you don't, right? And I am so angry, and I think I've mentioned this before. I'll probably mention it again. Utah legislature. There's a senator here. His name is Senator Johnson. I don't mind name dropping that. He did, like I said, he did I'm still mad about it. That's why you hear me talk about it so often. He did a documentary about the evils of social emotional learning. And he got people on board with that. And of course, as a therapist, I'm like, no, not just as a therapist, but as somebody who has seen people in intergenerational poverty, where that, like, he was like, well, thinking about your thinking is child abuse, or so. In one of the things I watched on that, it was they were saying that making kids think about their thinking is child abuse, and I'm like, no, it's not. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. We need to think about it. That's the whole point, right? It's one of those executive functioning skills that kids need to have. Like there's a by the way, look up executive functioning skills if you want to know how to be successful. Like Harvard has a whole website dedicated to that. That's resilience, right? That is how we overcome things like poverty and trauma and things like that. We build these executive functioning skills, right? We build resiliency. We have people in our lives to teach us that. But when you have intergenerational poverty and you have parents who never learned those skills, who's going to teach you those skills? Right? The school could teach you those skills. That is what social emotional learning is. That is why some schools started to do that. But then we get people who are so upset about it, so upset about this social emotional learning. And I'm like, no, this is how we teach kids, right? I work with inmates now. I work with inmates coming out of prison now. And I think about it. I look at those children I worked with in intergenerational poverty. And if there's an intervention, like a social emotional learning intervention, I'm like, I'm probably not going to see them. And if there's not, I probably will. Because all I do with the people coming out of prison now is teach them social emotional learning, otherwise known as cognitive behavioral therapy. Because they don't know where their cognitive distortion is, right? They are not seeing the world the same way they need to see the world for society. But changing the narrative about that information is a way to consolidate power. Again, right? If you can make people believe that some horrible group of people like the liberals are trying to brainwash people with social emotional learning, with DEI, with critical race theory, then we can get rid of the stuff that challenges our power. And that does, by the way. All of those things challenge the power. It challenges the power of uneducated people. It challenges the power of white men. Sorry, it does. It challenges the power. Like white men have a huge hold on power. And I know I'm going to lose people there. I am not saying it's bad for white men to be in power. But I am saying that there is an inordinate, right? I don't know if inordinate's the word. I was talking to somebody about the law of large numbers the other day, and if you're looking at the law of large numbers, essentially says that if you find like so many people in a certain population, if you shrink that population, you should find the similar distribution of those people, right? But that's not how we find it in the United States right now, right? Women are about half of the people in the United States right now. But what percentage of the Senate and the House do they make up? Right? There are still inequities out there. And granted, they're not all going to be solved, right? And we can't complain about them all. But I get so frustrated with people saying they don't exist, because they do, right? But saying they don't exist is another way to consolidate power. Telling people that other people who are at a disadvantage, trying to get at least to a level area with people, is somehow going to bring you down. Is somehow people trying to get ahead of you. And that's just not going to happen. Not for a while, right? And DEI definitely didn't do it, because guess what? We just had our president fire a very qualified black man and replace him with a less qualified white man. And my brother-in-law pointed out this is the exact reason we have DEI, because very qualified minority people, right? Very qualified women, very qualified people who do not look the way certain people want them to look, don't get the jobs that white people who are less qualified than them get. That was the reason behind DEI. That it wasn't so that less qualified people of color or of women or of the LGBTQ community could get jobs they weren't qualified for. It was so that less qualified white men wouldn't get the jobs that could have been taken by more qualified people who just happened to be a different color or gender or sexual orientation than the people wanted, right? And those things still happen. And we're not going to get rid of all of them. And I always tell people, right, again, because I'm a therapist, we can work to make those changes as a society, but in the interim, the individual has to act like they don't exist, right? And I don't mean that we as a society should act like they don't exist. That gets us nowhere. We can't dismantle things if that happens. But as individuals, sometimes we have to work hard and act like those inequities don't exist, because otherwise we get too discouraged, right? We work hard, we get the education, we get the experience, we become extremely qualified, and we do our absolute best. And we move the needle a little bit, right? We wish we could move it more, but we move the needle a little bit. Right? That's all we can do. We can try to work hard, and things are better. Things are way better than they were in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s even, right? But then we still get pushback, and so we have to keep pushing back on the pushback. I know I'm rambling all over the place. I'll end this soon. But there's just so much I've had to get out, because it is so frustrating, and there's so much, and it is coming at us so fast, and it is exhausting. Golly, I get so tired. And the problem with it being exhausting is because when it's coming at us this fast, we have to fight it more, right? We have to, I'm like, this is almost half hour. I can't even believe I've been talking this long. We have to fight it more, right? Not less. And so getting tired isn't really an option, right? We know what we're seeing, right? Those of us who are willing to keep our eyes open and who care about the people who have less power, right? The people who are more vulnerable, right? Those are the people I care about. I want people to have power. I want them to find power within themselves. I want to assert that power to the best of their ability. I want them to have the agency to decide on their own lives, right? And right now, all of the power that gives people agency is being consolidated into a person who is enjoying taking that power because other people around him don't think that people should have that autonomy, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those were the first foundational rights that were noted in our founding documents, right? In the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution was just a way to outline how we keep that. I don't want to take that from anybody, even if I don't agree necessarily with the way they choose to use that agency. I've had people who disagree with me a lot on politics, right? My husband and I were very active as part of the Republican Party and the caucus system in Utah for a very long time. We were trying to give the leadership positions that we held to other people. I gave up a very powerful position. Delegates to the state have very powerful positions. I've given up powerful positions just because I want other people to experience and be a part of the process, even if I don't agree with them, right? And I've done that. I did that to somebody who was totally for Trump and totally right-winged and totally different than I normally would have. And I stepped aside for them because I wanted people to experience the process. And I felt like I'd had a fair amount of time doing that. I don't know that I would do that again, just because seeing what people do with that power, because I realize not everybody feels about it the same way that I do. They don't see other people as needing to have power too. They just want to assert their own power, or they want to be angry about their own perceived lack of it. right? And we all do. We all lack some power. Right now, I don't trust the Republican Party with any power because it's all going to Donald Trump. And until I hear some Republicans get really loud, and I've said this before, I'll say it again, I'm not voting Republican again. And I am going to keep writing to the people that that represent me, right? Utah's been doing the same thing. Utah has been awful this year about trying to consolidate power in the legislature, right? I appreciate that our governor hasn't necessarily tried to do that yet, but he has still been yielding his power to some extent to the legislature, and he stopped speaking out against Donald Trump. And I know part of the reason that he did that was because of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And I can kind of respect his reasoning. He thought maybe he was making it a little more divisive out there. I don't think he was. He was always very clear about things. He wasn't hateful. But being quiet doesn't work. And so I stopped donating to his campaign. I've stopped doing stopped giving money to the Republican Party. I've stopped. And there's been a thing in Utah where people are like, well, register Republican because the Republicans have power, and the only way you're going to have power is by joining the party. I would encourage them to not do that because that doesn't work either. And joining the party shows that they have numbers. And you don't want people to believe that the Republican Party has numbers right now. You don't want people to believe that there are people who believe the same things as them. Because here's the one thing that my husband and I learned in the Republican Party. The people who hold the power, the people who show up, the people who do things, don't necessarily share the same views as the Republicans who sit home and are just registered Republican, right? People would call us rhinos, which is Republican in name only. My husband would always say, yeah, but they're minnows, which is majority in name only. And the people I've talked to in Utah, there are more people who understand how dangerous Donald Trump is, even in the Republican Party, right? I am very disappointed in our leadership because I know how some of them feel, and they are not saying what they need to say. There are more people who see Donald Trump as a threat, but they also see that he has power, and they see him as a way to get power for themselves, or at the very least power for what they care about and what they think their constituents care about. But I'm telling you, the people who are supporting Donald Trump, they're just the loudest right now. They're just the loudest. They are not the majority. Now, there may be numbers that come out that prove me wrong soon. I don't know. I think there are already some numbers that say there's a lot of Americans who approve of what Donald Trump's doing. I don't know if those polls are accurate. Again, I would have to see their methods. And I should probably look at that. I am willing to take that kind of information in. But again, I get so frustrated. I'll have to talk about critical race theory at some point too, because I hear people talk about critical race theory all the time, and I actually did do upper division classes on critical race theory in my undergraduate. And I'm like, people have no idea what they're talking about they have no idea what they're talking about half the time. More than half the time. Right? And I've heard, again, Senator Johnson, I will call him out. I'm not if you have power and you've been elected, I'm going to name you. Senator Johnson is like, but that's not what it is. It sounds good. Right? When he was talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in particular at this point. Says it sounds good. It sounds like this, but that's not really what it is. No, it absolutely is not what you're saying it is. Not what you have created it to be. What you're saying it is illegal. It can't be that. It is something totally different that obviously you don't understand, because it is so much easier to make people afraid and get power that way. And I have watched over the last 15 years, being again a very active participant in the Republican Party, as the Republicans have used fear to consolidate their power. And that's all they've got. Because, wait for it, right? They have. But Trump doesn't have to be doing what he's doing right now, right? He's got the Congress, right? He's got the courts for the most part. And he's, right, the House and the Senate. He's got the courts. He could be passing things left and right and having people pass things left and right in an appropriate manner that goes with the Constitution. He could be making these changes. He has the power to do it. He doesn't want to do it that way. I don't know if it's laziness or just ego. But he wants to make sure people know he's the boss, right? And there are so many things. I posted them on my Facebook. There's just too many. There's too many and it's exhausting. And I always come back to the fact that there are good people out there, that even the people that I disagree with are good people. For the most part, they really just want good things for themselves and their families. They think they understand that this is the way to do it. And I'm going to have to disagree with them on that, right? They're the same people who go off on how awful the Democrats are. I never bought that line, right? I might have bought it a little bit during the Clinton administration, but I was a teenager then, so I'm like, I don't know how much you can give me there. But for the most part, the Democrats have a different way of seeing things. Right? They have a different way of believing things should be done. I never bought this. They're evil this and they're evil that. No, I know a lot of good Democrats. People who care about other people. Right? I thought I knew a lot of good Republicans who care about other people, but they have just fallen down this rabbit hole of hate. And it's a little frustrating, right? If you do want to hear a Republican who has some good information on those kinds of, like Arthur C. Brooks, great reading. I really do like his stuff, right? He talks about compassion. He talks about, right, he truly believes that the economics that we have going in the United States is the best way to lift people out of poverty. And you know what? I don't know that I know enough to disagree with him. I'm pretty sure that economically speaking, certain forms of capitalism have been far more effective of lifting people out of poverty than socialism has. Again, it's a topic for another time, and I really should start doing these topics again. But today it's just a rant, a really long 40-minute rant. Sorry, guys. If you hung through it this long, great. Maybe you got to know me a little better. And instead of, I hope it didn't, I hope it made some sense. Because right now it was just me needing to get out what's on my head. Because we have to, right? If it sits in our souls too long, it just turns into muck. But I believe that the people in the United States are basically good. I worry that too many of them are afraid right now. And I don't just mean afraid for legitimate things that could happen. I mean, too many of them are afraid of each other. There are definitely ideas. There are ideas out there and philosophies that we should fear coming to power. I don't know that we should ever fear our fellow Americans, and sometimes that's hard when it looks like they are trying to hurt us, right? It's a hard thing, right? I want to be tolerant. I want to believe the best about people. But even doing that, even though I do believe the best about people, we cannot allow power to go unchecked. And we cannot allow the people with the most power to run roughshod over the people who have the least. And that's really what's happening right now. They're consolidating power at the top. And they will run roughshod over the people with the least power. And the more power they get, the more they will have new people to be the least. And eventually it'll be you. And me. And we should all be fighting for each other. We should all be fighting for each other's rights. We should all be fighting for each other's happiness. We should all be fighting with love, right? And as a therapist, I got to be careful with the shoulds, but do you see that that's the vision I have for America? That's the vision so many of us who want to see Donald Trump gone have for America, because Donald Trump's vision for America has nothing to do with love. It doesn't even have anything to do with efficiency or expediency. It has to do with consolidating power. And it hurts people. It really hurts people. And I think people need to look at themselves and say, am I okay with it hurting people this way because it hurts the people I hate? Or if you don't think that you hate them, does it hurt the people that I don't think should exist? Who I don't think are right? So many questions we have to ask ourselves on a daily basis. And I mean me, right? Me, it's me. I have to ask myself so many questions on a daily basis to make sure, right? It's one of the blessings of being a social worker, is that I don't have the luxury of not asking myself those questions. I don't have the luxury of of just forgetting about power dynamics. I don't have the luxury of that as a social worker. I don't have the luxury of not thinking about my thinking and wondering where maybe the cognitive distortions are. As a country, I'm not so sure we don't have that luxury either, because all I see are cognitive distortions in the way that we interact with each other. And trust me, I see mine. I'm like, oh, and when I miss them, I see them later. I'm like, nope, that was a cognitive distortion. Let's go through and review that. Where did it get off? Where did it get off the, base? Did I take that personally? Was it personalization, right? There's a cognitive distortion. Did I minimize what was going on? Did I maximize what was going on? Did I think I was reading somebody else's mind? Right? By the way, we don't know what the other person's thinking. Not ever. We have to take their word for what they tell us it is. Right? For what comes out of their mouth. And the truth is, I don't know what anybody is thinking. I can only go off of their actions and the effects of their actions. Right? I can't even give intent to that. I can make some guesses, but it's still a guess, and I have to acknowledge that. Right? Because believing that we know exactly what somebody else is thinking, again, cognitive distortion, not healthy for us. Gets us angry really fast, right? And I'm no different. But for anybody who actually watched this to the end, thank you. This is just me spitting things out into the universe again, because I needed to. And I will probably get back to a more organized way of saying things that only takes 6 minutes. Because I don't think people really want to pay attention to me longer than 6 minutes if they want to pay attention to me at all. So, happy Sabbath. Have a good night. Hopefully your week goes well and sleep well so you can wake up fighting.